Kalorama, a recorded books hybrid imprint, presents Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation, by Kristin Kobes Du Mez. Read by Suzie Althens. Introduction. On a bitterly cold day in January 2016, Donald Trump stood on the stage of an auditorium at a small Christian college in Iowa. He boasted of his poll numbers and his crowd sizes. He warned of the dangers posed by Muslims and undocumented immigrants, and he talked of building a border wall. He denigrated American politicians as stupid, weak, and pathetic. He claimed that Christianity was under siege and urged Christians to band together and assert their power. He promised to lead. He had no doubts about the loyalty of his followers. "I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters," he claimed. That morning, the Reverend Robert Jeffress, pastor of First Baptist Dallas, introduced Trump. As a pastor, Jeffress couldn't endorse a candidate, but he made clear that he wouldn't be there if he didn't think Trump would make a great president. Jeffress wasn't alone. Already at that point, before the Iowa caucuses at the beginning of February, 42% of white evangelicals supported Trump, more than any other candidate. The reason was simple, Jeffress contended. Evangelicals were sick and tired of the status quo. They were looking for the leader who would reverse the downward death spiral of this nation that we love so dearly. I wasn't in Iowa at the time, but I watched this spectacle unfold as it streamed online. I knew the setting well. The college was Dordt College, my alma mater. The town was Sioux Center, my hometown. I'd grown up a short walk from campus, on the other side of the old farmstead, only recently converted back to native prairie. I'd attended the local Christian grade school, where my mom was my PE teacher. My dad, an ordained minister, taught theology at the college since before I was born. Every year as a child, I'd attended Easter sunrise services in that auditorium. And as a college student, I faithfully attended chapel services in that same space. Standing on the stage where Trump now stood, I had led prayers, performed in Christian praise teams, and during choir rehearsal, flirted with the man who would become my husband. We married in a church just down the road. Although I moved away after college, the space remained intimately familiar. But as I watched those in the overflow crowd waving signs, laughing at insults, and shouting back in affirmation, I wondered who these people were. I didn't recognize them. Not everyone present that day shared in the enthusiasm for Trump. Some were there out of curiosity. Others came in protest. A small group of residents, including students from the college and the Christian grade school, stood bundled against the chill, holding handmade signs proclaiming, "Love your neighbors," and "Perfect love casts out fear." But their numbers were dwarfed by Trump's supporters. Their numbers were again dwarfed on November 8, 2016, when 82% of Sioux County voters voted for Donald Trump, a proportion remarkably close to the 81% of white evangelical voters who backed Trump, according to national exit polls, and proved crucial to his victory over Hillary Clinton. Trump's confidence in the loyalty of his followers seemed like bluster at the time, but it soon took on a prophetic ring. His evangelical supporters stuck by his side even as he mocked opponents, incited violence at his rallies, and boasted of his manhood on national television. Then there were Trump's sexual indiscretions. Divorce was one thing, rumors of sexual escapades another. But the release of the Access Hollywood tape furnished irrefutable evidence of the candidate speaking in lewd terms about seducing and assaulting women. How could family values conservatives support a man who flouted every value they insisted they held dear? How could the self-professed moral majority embrace a candidate who reveled in vulgarity? How could evangelicals who'd turned WWJD, What Would Jesus Do, into a national phenomenon justify their support for a man who seemed the very antithesis of the savior they claimed to emulate? Pundits scrambled to explain. Evangelicals were holding their noses. choosing the lesser of two evils, and Hillary Clinton was the greatest evil. Evangelicals were thinking in purely transactional terms, as Trump himself is often said to do, voting for Trump because he promised to deliver Supreme Court appointments that would protect the unborn and secure their own religious liberty. Or maybe the polls were misleading. By confusing evangelicals in name only with good, church-attending, Bible-believing Christians, sloppy pollsters were giving evangelicalism a bad rap. But evangelical support for Trump was no aberration, nor was it merely a pragmatic choice. It was, rather, the culmination of evangelicals' embrace of militant masculinity, an ideology that enshrines patriarchal authority and condones the callous display of power, at home and abroad. By the time Trump arrived, proclaiming himself their savior, conservative white evangelicals had already traded a faith that privileges humility and elevates the least of these for one that derides gentleness as the province of wusses. Rather than turning the other cheek, they'd resolved to defend their faith and their nation, secure in the knowledge that the ends justify the means. Having replaced the Jesus of the Gospels with a vengeful warrior Christ, it's no wonder many came to think of Trump in the same way. In 2016, many observers were stunned at evangelicals' apparent betrayal of their own values. In reality, evangelicals did not cast their vote despite their beliefs, but because of them. Donald Trump did not trigger this militant turn. His rise was symptomatic of a long-standing condition. Survey data reveal the stark contours of the contemporary evangelical worldview. More than any other religious demographic in America, white evangelical Protestants support preemptive war, condone the use of torture, and favor the death penalty. They are more likely than members of other faith groups to own a gun, to believe citizens should be allowed to carry guns in most places, and to feel safer with a firearm around. White evangelicals are more opposed to immigration reform and have more negative views of immigrants than any other religious demographic. 2/3 support Trump's border wall. 68% of white evangelical Protestants, more than any other demographic, do not think that the United States has a responsibility to accept refugees. More than half of white evangelical Protestants think a majority non-white U.S. population would be a negative development. White evangelicals are considerably more likely than others to believe that Islam encourages violence, to refuse to see Islam as part of mainstream American society, and to perceive natural conflict between Islam and democracy. At the same time, white evangelicals believe that Christians in America face more discrimination than Muslims. White evangelicals are significantly more authoritarian than other religious groups, and they express confidence in their religious leaders at much higher rates than do members of other faiths. For evangelicals, domestic and foreign policy are two sides of the same coin. Christian nationalism, the belief that America is God's chosen nation and must be defended as such, serves as a powerful predictor of intolerance toward immigrants, racial minorities, and non-Christians. It is linked to opposition to gay rights and gun control, to support for harsher punishments for criminals, to justifications for the use of excessive force against Black Americans in law enforcement situations, and to traditionalist gender ideology. White evangelicals have pieced together this patchwork of issues, and a nostalgic commitment to rugged, aggressive, militant white masculinity serves as the thread binding them together in a coherent whole. A father's rule in the home is inextricably linked to heroic leadership on the national stage, and the fate of the nation hinges on both. By November 2016, the affinities were clear. A substantial number of white evangelicals shared Trump's nationalism, Islamophobia, racism, and nativism. They condoned his nasty politics. They agreed that injured protesters got what they deserved, that the country would be better off getting rid of bad apples, and that people were too sensitive about what was said in politics. Drawn to his populist appeals, white evangelicals demonstrated a preference for rejecting political compromise, for strong, solitary leadership, and for breaking the rules when necessary. These dispositions held whether white evangelicals were defined by affiliation, self-identification, or belief and behavior. For their part, evangelicals prefer to define themselves not by their political beliefs, but according to their theological convictions, or more precisely, according to 4 evangelical distinctives. To be an evangelical, according to the National Association of Evangelicals, is to uphold the Bible as one's ultimate authority, to confess the centrality of Christ's atonement, to believe in a born-again conversion experience, and to actively work to spread this good news and reform society accordingly. When defined in this way, evangelicalism manifests as a racially diverse and global movement. Yet, when it comes to delineating the contours of modern American evangelicalism, the primacy of these 4 distinctives is arguable. Evangelicals claim to uphold the Bible as the highest authority in the Christian life, but there are more than 31,000 verses in the Bible. Which ones are considered essential guides to faithful Christian practice, and which are readily ignored or explained away? In like manner, when evangelicals define themselves in terms of Christ's atonement or as disciples of a risen Christ, what sort of Jesus are they imagining? Is their Savior a conquering warrior, a man's man who takes no prisoners and wages holy war? Or is he a sacrificial lamb who offers himself up for the restoration of all things? How one answers these questions will determine what it looks like to follow Jesus. In truth, what it means to be an evangelical has always depended on the world beyond the faith. In recent years, evangelical leaders themselves have come to recognize, and frequently lament, that a pop culture definition has usurped a proper historical and theological one, such that today many people count themselves evangelical because they watch Fox News, consider themselves religious, and vote Republican. Frustrated with this confusion of real and supposed evangelicals, evangelical elites have taken pollsters and pundits to task for carelessly conflating the two. But the problem goes beyond sloppy categorization. Among evangelicals, high levels of theological illiteracy mean that many evangelicals hold views traditionally defined as heresy, calling into question the centrality of theology to evangelicalism generally. Moreover, many who do subscribe to these distinctives do not in fact identify as evangelical. This is the case especially when it comes to Christians of color. Just 25% of African Americans who subscribe to all 4 distinctives identify as evangelical. This is not a simple misunderstanding. Black Christians have long resisted embracing the evangelical label because it is clear to them that there is more to evangelicalism than straightforward statements of belief. Survey data indicate that on nearly every social and political issue, Black Protestants apply their faith in ways that run counter to white evangelicalism. The differences may be rooted not just in experience, but in the faith itself. In practice, the seemingly neutral evangelical distinctives turn out to be culturally and racially specific. Although white evangelicals like to point to the existence of Black evangelicals to distance their movement from allegations of racism and associations with conservative politics, Black Christians themselves have attempted to draw attention to evangelicalism's problem of whiteness, and to white evangelicals' inability, or unwillingness, to confront this problem. In the aftermath of the 2016 election, the chorus of those calling out evangelicalism's problem of whiteness became more difficult to ignore. To many Black Christians, evangelicalism had become a white religious brand. Although foundational to white evangelical identity, race rarely acts as an independent variable. For conservative white evangelicals, the good news of the Christian gospel has become inextricably linked to a staunch commitment to patriarchal authority, gender difference, and Christian nationalism, and all of these are intertwined with white racial identity. Many Americans who now identify as evangelicals are identifying with this operational theology, one that is Republican in its politics and traditionalist in its values. This God and country faith is championed by those who regularly attend evangelical churches and by those who do not. It creates affinities across denominational, regional, and socio-economic differences, even as it divides Americans, and American Christians, into those who embrace these values and those who do not. In this way, conservative white evangelicalism has become a polarizing force in American politics and society. White evangelicalism has such an expansive reach in large part because of the culture it has created, the culture that it sells. Over the past half-century or so, evangelicals have produced and consumed a vast quantity of religious products: Christian books and magazines, CCM, Christian contemporary music, Christian radio and television, feature films, ministry conferences, blogs, T-shirts, and home decor. Many evangelicals who would be hard-pressed to articulate even the most basic tenets of evangelical theology have nonetheless been immersed in this evangelical popular culture. They've raised children with the help of James Dobson's Focus on the Family radio programs, or grown up watching VeggieTales cartoons. They rocked out to Amy Grant or the Newsboys or DC Talk. They learned about purity before they learned about sex, and they have a silver ring to prove it. They watched The Passion of the Christ, Soul Surfer, or the latest Kirk Cameron film with their youth group. They attended Promise Keepers with guys from church and read Wild at Heart in small groups. They've learned more from Pat Robertson, John Piper, Joyce Meyer, and the Gospel Coalition than they have from their pastor's Sunday sermons. The diffusion of evangelical consumer culture extends far beyond the orbit of evangelical churches. Cultural evangelicalism has made deep inroads into mainline Christianity, to the point that distinguishing members of a denomination like the United Methodist Church from evangelicals obscures more than it reveals. My own upbringing in the Christian Reformed Church, a small denomination founded by Dutch immigrants, is a case in point. For generations, members defined themselves against American Christianity, but due to the onslaught of evangelical popular culture, large swaths of the denomination are now functionally evangelical in terms of affinity and belief. Denominational boundaries are easily breached by the flow of religious merchandising. Indeed, one can participate in this religious culture without attending church at all. Yet this cultural evangelicalism remains intertwined with establishment evangelicalism. Denominational organizations and parachurch groups, pastors and theologians, colleges and seminaries, publishing houses and charities generate much of the religious content that is marketed to an immense congregation of consumers. Evangelical leaders bestow authority upon one another, blurbing each other's books, defending each other on social media, and determining which up-and-coming writers, pastors, and organizations are worthy of promotion, and which should be shunned. At times, evangelical popular culture can subvert the authority of the evangelical elite. During the Trump campaign, many pastors were surprised to find that they wielded little influence over people in the pews. What they didn't realize was that they were up against a more powerful system of authority, an evangelical popular culture that reflected and reinforced a compelling ideology and a coherent worldview. A few words preached on Sunday morning did little to disrupt the steady diet of religious products evangelicals consumed day in, day out. Rather than seeking to distinguish real from supposed evangelicals, then, it is more useful to think in terms of the degree to which individuals participate in this evangelical culture of consumption. There are those who rarely consume media produced outside of this world. When it comes to music, news sources, books, and radio, these individuals inhabit a separate and sanctified consumer space. There are also many who participate to lesser degrees. They may listen to secular music, catch the latest Hollywood blockbusters, and read occasional non-Christian books, even as they regularly tune into Christian radio, sing along to praise music, purchase books on Christian child-rearing, and devour Christian romance novels. Still, by partaking in a common culture, individuals form bonds with other like-minded consumers, and these affinities form the basis of a shared culture identity. At any given time, numerous creeds have coexisted and competed for influence within evangelicalism. Even today, the evangelical tent includes Calvinists and Pentecostals, social justice warriors, and prosperity gospel gurus. However, over the past several decades, conservatives have consolidated their power within the broader movement, offering certainty in times of social change, promising security in the face of global threats, and, perhaps most critically, affirming the righteousness of a white Christian America, and, by extension, of white Christian Americans. Conservative evangelicals succeeded in winning the hearts and minds of large numbers of American Christians. They achieved this dominance not only by crafting a compelling ideology, but also by advancing their agenda through strategic organizations and political alliances, on occasion by way of ruthless displays of power, and critically, by dominating the production and distribution of Christian consumer culture. Like evangelicalism in general, evangelical popular culture encompasses a broad spectrum of religious and political commitments. The same store might stock books by conservative financial advisor Dave Ramsey and social justice activist Jim Wallace, Christian feminist manifestos penned by Rachel Held Evans and Sarah Bessey, and classic defenses of traditional womanhood by Elizabeth Elliot. Yet the power of conservative white evangelicalism is apparent in both the size of its market share and its influence over religious distribution channels. As a diffuse movement, evangelicalism lacks clear institutional authority structures, but the evangelical marketplace itself helps define who is inside and who is outside the fold. Lifeway Christian Stores, once the nation's largest Christian retail chain and an affiliate of the Southern Baptist Convention, has wielded that power overtly. When Rachel Held Evans and Jen Hatmaker ran afoul of conservative orthodoxies related to sexuality and gender, Lifeway stopped carrying their books. It did, however, stock Todd Starnes' The Deplorable's Guide to Making America Great Again. Winning was just the beginning. Change may start at the White House, but it finishes at your house, and R.C. Sproul and Abdul Salib's The Dark Side of Islam. The products Christians consume shape the faith they inhabit. Today, what it means to be a conservative evangelical is as much about culture as it is about theology. This is readily apparent in the heroes they celebrate. Establishment evangelicals might count Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield among their eminent forebears, but evangelical popular culture is teeming with a different ensemble of heroes, men like William Wallace, as brought to life by Mel Gibson, Teddy Roosevelt, the mythic American cowboy, Generals Douglas MacArthur and George S. Patton, and the ordinary American soldier, and the actor, John Wayne. As the on-screen embodiment of the heroic cowboy and idealized American soldier, and also as an outspoken conservative activist in real life, John Wayne became an icon of rugged American manhood for generations of conservatives. Pat Buchanan parroted Wayne in his presidential bid. Newt Gingrich called Wayne's Sands of Iwo Jima the formative movie of my life, and Oliver North echoed slogans from that film in his 1994 Senate campaign. In time, Wayne would also emerge as an icon of Christian masculinity. Evangelicals admired, and still admire him, for his toughness and his swagger. He protected the weak, and he wouldn't let anything get in the way of his pursuit of justice and order. Wayne was not an evangelical Christian, despite rumors to this effect regularly circulated by evangelicals themselves. He did not live a moral life by the standards of traditional Christian virtue. Yet, for many evangelicals, Wayne would come to symbolize a different set of virtues, a nostalgic yearning for a mythical Christian America, a return to traditional gender roles, and the reassertion of white, patriarchal authority. Although Wayne occupies a prominent place in the pantheon of evangelical heroes, he is but one of many rugged and even ruthless icons of masculinity that evangelicals imbued with religious significance. Like Wayne, the heroes who best embodied militant Christian masculinity were those unencumbered by traditional Christian virtues. In this way, militant masculinity linked religious and secular conservatism, helping to secure an alliance with profound political ramifications. For many evangelicals, these militant heroes would come to define not only Christian manhood, but Christianity itself. Conventional wisdom tells us that fundamentalists and evangelicals retreated from public view and political engagement after the Scopes monkey trial in 1925, or with the end of Prohibition in 1933, or out of a desire to focus on individual soul-saving, or due to various combinations, only to reappear on the national stage in the 1970s, seemingly out of nowhere. But as we will see, the roots of a militarized and politicized evangelical masculinity stretch back to earlier in American history. Antecedents can be found in 19th century Southern evangelicalism and in early 20th century muscular Christianity. But it was in the 1940s and 1950s that a potent mix of patriarchal gender traditionalism, militarism, and Christian nationalism coalesced to form the basis of a revitalized evangelical identity. With Billy Graham at the vanguard, evangelicals believed that they had a special role to play in keeping America Christian, American families strong, and the nation secure. The assertion of masculine power would accomplish all these goals. By the 1960s, the civil rights movement, feminism, and the Vietnam War led many Americans to question traditional values of all kinds. Gender and sexual norms were in flux. America no longer appeared to be a source of unalloyed good, and God did not, in fact, appear to be on her side. Evangelicals, however, clung fiercely to the belief that America was a Christian nation, that the military was a force for good, and that the strength of the nation depended on a properly ordered, patriarchal home. The evangelical political resurgence of the 1970s coalesced around a potent mix of family values, politics. But family values were always intertwined with ideas about sex, power, race, and nation. Feminism posed a threat to traditional womanhood, and also to national security by removing men from their duty to provide and protect, and opening the door to women in military combat. In similar fashion, Vietnam was not just a national security issue, but also a crisis of masculinity. Civil rights, too, dismantled time-honored traditions and destabilized the social order. Representing federal government overreach, or even an insidious communist agenda, desegregation also heightened the long-standing, imagined threat to white womanhood, and to the power of white men to police social and sexual boundaries. The reassertion of white patriarchy was central to the new family values politics, and by the end of the 1970s, the defense of patriarchal power had emerged as an evangelical distinctive. The evangelical consumer marketplace was, by then, a force to be reckoned with. But this expansive media network functioned less as a traditional soul-saving enterprise and more as a means by which evangelicals created and maintained their own identity, an identity rooted in family values and infused with a sense of cultural embattlement. Christian publishing, radio, and television taught evangelicals how to raise children, how to have sex, and whom to fear. And Christian media promoted a distinctive vision of evangelical masculinity. Finding comfort and courage in symbols of a mythical past, evangelicals looked to a rugged, heroic masculinity embodied by cowboys, soldiers, and warriors to point the way forward. For decades to come, militant masculinity and a sweet, submissive femininity would remain entrenched in the evangelical imagination, shaping conceptions of what was good and true. By the 1980s, evangelicals were able to mobilize so effectively as a partisan political force because they already participated in a shared cultural identity. A militant evangelical masculinity went hand in hand with a culture of fear. But it wasn't always apparent which came first.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?